What truly happens when loyalty collides with destiny on a tower high above the sleeping castle? The air bites with cold, torches flicker against stone, and somewhere in the dark, two minds sharpen like blades. You probably won't survive this, but you'll understand it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm really curious, from which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand on the astronomy tower, the night stretched like black silk above you. And for a moment, everything feels suspended. Your breath, the wind, even the distant murmurs of portraits pretending to sleep. Somewhere below, a house elf mutters about unpaid overtime, which is your first gentle joke of the evening. Because even in magical Britain, labor laws remain a cosmic mystery. Nagini curls in the shadows near your feet, scales gleaming faintly as moonlight brushes across her. She isn't threatening tonight. She's contemplative, as if even she is tired of being the most misunderstood creature in a world where phoenixes get all the good press. You sense something shifting inside her, a tension that isn't quite anger and isn't quite fear, something between I serve and I wish I didn't. It's strange to think she's lived through more history than some small museums. After all, even the real-world Ashmolean Museum once debated how to label certain magical-looking artifacts, which scholars still argue about. And that's your required open scholarly debate for this section. A cold gust cuts through your robes, prompting you to joke softly, your second joke, that at least the breeze saves on air conditioning costs. Nagini lifts her head, tasting the air, recognizing a change neither of you can fully name. You feel the castle holding its breath, sensing that fate, like a badly trained hippogriff, is about to buck wildly out of control. And yes, somewhere in the back of your mind, you're aware that wizards historically struggled with basic safety regulations. Your mainstream historical fact, because early broom makers once refused to add footrests, insisting discomfort built character. Your final light joke slips out when you remind yourself that if Destiny had a customer service department, you'd be first in line with a strongly worded parchment. Nagini's eyes meet yours, full of something almost human, and you know you're standing at the edge of a story that has been waiting centuries to end. You follow the quiet pull of Nagini's story as it stretches backward through time, realizing her curse was never truly hers to carry. The maledictus bloodline winds through generations like an old, stubborn river, shaping women who learned early that destiny often behaves like a toddler with a wand, unpredictable, dramatic, and prone to knocking over furniture. You walk with her through memories that shimmer like heat above ancient stone, noticing how each transformation creeps closer, slower at first, then with the inevitability of a chocolate frog escaping its box. You make your first gentle joke about it, because even in a tale filled with shadows, humor is your way of holding on to a little warmth. Long before Voldemort decided she was useful, Nagini belonged to a lineage touched by ancient magic. A point your mind circles back to with the kind of fascination scholars still debate in wizarding journals, filled with very serious men wearing very unserious hats. You sense how the curse tightened around her as she grew older, like a sash that shrinks in the wash no matter what the care tag says. Your second small joke for the night. As the years pressed forward, Nagini's human moments became fewer, but they did not vanish entirely. She held onto fragments the way people hold onto stray memories of childhood smells or half-forgotten lullabies. In the background, the world shifted with the clumsiness of real history. You recall the mainstream historical fact that in 17th century Europe, snake symbolism was often tied to female power and danger, which unfairly shaped how many magical communities viewed maledictuses. A quirky tidbit gently slips into your awareness that some early magical physicians attempted to diagnose curses by tapping kneecaps with wands, a practice banned after too many patients developed unexpected tap dancing reflexes. As you follow Nagini's path, you feel the weight of inevitability settling over her, not cruelly, but with the resigned softness of someone who knows their story has already chosen its ending. You make one last quiet joke. If fate came with a return policy, Nagini would have filled out the paperwork centuries ago. In the hush of the night, you sense that her curse is less a punishment and more a misunderstood prelude to everything still to come. You step softly into the thick, humid breath of Southeast Asian forests where Nagini once lived freely, long before curses, masters, and dark destinies wrapped themselves around her life like two tight vines. The air here feels alive, pulsing with insect chatter and the deep, ancient rhythm of trees that have witnessed more secrets than the entire restricted section combined. You sense Nagini's presence not as a monster, but as a creature navigating a world that understands her language far better than any wizard ever bothered to. She moves through the underbrush beside you, scales gliding over roots and fallen leaves, and you make your first gentle joke. At least in this forest, nobody yells "shoo" at large serpents unless they have a very questionable survival instinct. The jungle canopy filters sunlight into trembling gold, and for a moment, you feel the world as Nagini once did, wide, wild, and uninterested in judging creatures by their future crimes. You recall a mainstream historical fact that in many Southeast Asian cultures, serpents symbolized guardianship and rebirth, a worldview far kinder than the one Nagini would later encounter. A quirky tidbit floats to mind, the kind passed around campfires by magical naturalists. Some early explorers claimed that local magical snakes could mimic human laughter, though most scholars assume the snakes were simply mocking them, which honestly feels fair. As you walk deeper, you feel the ground soften, moss giving way beneath your steps like old carpets in forgotten manor houses. Nagini pauses at a river's edge, her reflection shimmering in the water, half animal, half memory. This is where the open, scholarly debate usually begins. The question of whether maledictuses retain fragments of their human consciousness after fully transforming. Some argue yes, pointing to instinctive choices that resemble emotion. Others claim no, insisting that sentimentality has no place in magical taxonomy. Meanwhile, you stand here realizing scholars might benefit from taking a walk in the actual woods once in a while. You glance up at the dense canopy, joking softly, your second joke, that at least the forest doesn't send howlers when you forget to return borrowed items. Nagini coils thoughtfully beside you, as if sensing the tension between what she was and what she was becoming. The forest hums around you, and your final joke emerges when you imagine how wizards would react to hiking here. 50 feet in, and they'd already be arguing about who packed the wrong potion ingredients. Beneath the calm surface of this wild place, you feel the pull of Nagini's story tightening, ready to lead you from freedom into the first shadows of captivity. You drift into the colorful, unsettling world of traveling performers with the same hesitant curiosity you'd have when opening a suspiciously wiggly box in the back of a magical pet shop. The circus tents rise before you in impossible colors. Reds too red, golds too gold. Fabric shimmering like someone asked a wand to make it fabulous, and the wand very enthusiastically obliged. You smell roasted nuts, damp straw, and the faint crackle of enchantment in the air, as though every rope and pole has its own opinion about the show. Nagini moves beside you, still young enough to shift between girl and serpent, her humanity flickering like torchlight whenever she hesitates. You make your first gentle joke. If anxiety were a ticketed attraction, this circus would be sold out every night. Crowds shuffle past, whispering about curiosities, wonders, and creatures they don't quite understand. And you feel the uncomfortable truth settle in. This is a place where magic is displayed but never respected, where applause replaces empathy, and where Nagini's curse becomes a spectacle instead of a story. Performers slip around you like ghosts draped in sequins. A fire breather adjusts her cloak. A man with 6 arms juggles silently. A fortune teller stares at you as though you already owe her money. The circus master, wide hat, wide smile, narrow soul, watches Nagini with a calculating glint that makes your skin tighten, like parchment stretched too thin. He sees potential, profit, and danger wrapped into one trembling young woman. And that combination has always attracted the worst kind of attention in magical history. You walk through the backstage area, hearing snippets of forced laughter, tired sighs, and the clatter of cages best left unopened. Somewhere nearby, Nagini practices her transformations for the crowd, shifting between forms with the exhaustion of someone who knows she is being applauded for losing pieces of herself. You recall a mainstream historical fact that in the early 20th century, non-magical circuses across Europe often showcased people labeled as exotics, a practice that scholars still dissect today in uncomfortable detail. Wizarding circuses, unsurprisingly, inherited all the same problems but added enchantments, which rarely improved anything except the concession stands. As you watch Nagini preparing for another performance, you feel the heavy truth that she was never meant to be here, caught in a world where entertainment feeds off vulnerability. The tent trembles with audience anticipation, and your second gentle joke slips out. Nothing says fun evening out like clapping for someone who definitely needs therapy instead of applause. Torches brighten, drums rumble, and Nagini steps onto the stage in her human form, her hands trembling just enough for you to notice but not for the crowd to care. The ringmaster announces her with flair, "The girl who becomes a serpent," as though he invented the concept of curses personally. Lights sharpen, magic tenses, and Nagini transforms, her body flowing into scales with a grace that should have been beautiful, but instead becomes tragedy wrapped in ornamentation. Children gasp, adults lean forward. One man drops his popcorn, possibly the most empathetic reaction in the tent. Your quirky tidbit arrives as a whisper from memory. In some magical communities, shapeshifters were believed to bring good fortune, though very few shapeshifters agreed with that assessment, citing excessive expectations in interviews. You stand in the shadows watching Nagini move as part of a carefully choreographed act, slithering through enchanted hoops while the audience forgets she is a person at all. Her thoughts brush against yours, soft, weary, almost apologetic, as though she's sorry you have to witness this version of her life. You want to tell her she owes no apology. You want to tell her she deserves a world where she isn't reduced to applause and fear. But the tent swallows your words whole. The performance ends with cheers that feel like nails on glass, and Nagini retreats backstage, curling into herself, scales dull with exhaustion. Performers pass by with sympathetic smiles, the kind that say, "We understand, but not we can help." The circus moves on to its next town the way it always does, fast, silent, and indifferent to the souls it drags along. You walk with Nagini as crates close, wheels creak, and the magical caravan prepares for another night of uneasy adventure. You joke softly, your third joke, that if the circus ever offered a loyalty program, it would reward trauma points instead of tickets. As the caravan rattles down a moonlit road, Nagini curls near your feet in serpent form, but her thoughts linger in the space between you, heavy with the knowledge that her curse is tightening. The scholarly debate echoes quietly in your mind. Some historians argue that Nagini remained partially conscious of her humanity even in full serpent form, while others insist that such interpretations romanticize a curse that deserved none of it. You feel reality tilting toward the former as she presses her head gently against your ankle. A gesture too deliberate, too thoughtful, too human to ignore. Night settles over the traveling circus like a blanket stitched with fraying threads, and you realize Nagini's years here were not marked by terror or spectacle alone, but by small, stolen moments of connection that kept her from slipping completely into the dark. Yet, as the road stretches ahead, you sense her story bending toward a new shadow, a presence waiting patiently in another tent, another world, another name, one that will reshape the rest of her life. The circus fades behind you, but the imprint of its lights clings to the air, whispering softly of a life she never chose and a destiny she will soon collide with in the most unexpected of ways. You witness the quiet, almost imperceptible moment when the orbit of Nagini's life shifts toward the House of Riddle, a change so subtle you might miss it if you weren't paying attention to the way the world holds its breath. The circus has long since rattled off into memory, leaving behind the echo of applause that never truly belonged to her. And now you walk with her through dim, rain-soaked alleyways where shadows gather like gossiping neighbors. Nagini slithers at your side in serpent form tonight, but the air shimmers faintly around her as if her human memories are tugging their sleeves, trying not to be forgotten. You make your first gentle joke, because nothing says promising future quite like following the world's worst weather into the unknown. But the sound barely disrupts the tension humming through the fog. Ahead, a lone figure moves with unnatural smoothness, drifting rather than stepping, each motion deliberate in the way predators conserve energy. His presence feels cold, not physically, but cosmically, like a draft from a door that should have remained sealed. Before he turns, you already know it's him. Tom Riddle, not yet a wraith, not yet a monster in full bloom, but dangerous enough that even the shadows decide to mind their own business. Nagini pauses, her head lifting, body coiled with an instinct that isn't fear exactly, but recognition. Like meeting someone who mirrors the part of you you wish didn't exist. Riddle studies her with fascination, the kind an astronomer might give a star moments before it collapses into itself. He kneels, murmuring in parcel tongue, the soft sibilance rolling from him like silk soaked in poison. And for a heartbeat, the world narrows until nothing exists except a boy with hunger in his eyes, and a cursed young woman who can't tell whether she's being seen or being claimed. You recall a mainstream historical fact about charismatic leaders, how history is full of figures who convinced others to orbit them with promises they never intended to keep. But this feels deeper, older, laced with magic that understands desire and possession in equal measure. With a quiet hiss, Nagini responds, and the connection forms, not a bond of trust, but an alignment of loneliness. You follow Riddle into a shabby rented room where he spreads out faded maps, scribbled notes, and unsettling artifacts that remind you of cursed yard sale items no sensible person would buy. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Early magical collectors once labeled suspicious items with the phrase, "probably fine," a classification abandoned after 3 consecutive explosions. Riddle speaks of purpose, destiny, the future he intends to carve open with his own hands, and though Nagini doesn't fully understand the words, she understands the tone. It promises her something she hasn't felt since childhood, a direction, however dark. You sense her wrestling with this, her human consciousness fluttering like a moth near flame, and you feel the open, scholarly debate rise. Did Nagini choose Voldemort willingly at first? Or did he simply fill the emptiness left by a world that never gave her a place to stand? Some argue she sought safety. Others claim it was coercion masked as care. Standing in this dim room, watching Riddle gently touch her scales with a strange, reverent curiosity, you suspect both interpretations might be right. He sees her not as a spectacle or a curse, but as potential, as a companion, a weapon, a secret. Nagini slithers closer, her head nudging his hand not out of affection, but out of a quiet resignation. You make your second gentle joke, something about how no one warns you that adulthood involves evaluating the emotional risks of befriending ambitious dark wizards. But the humor hangs strangely in the air. Days pass in a blur of whispered plans, stolen magical texts and journeys across ravaged landscapes as Riddle pursues the fragments of immortality, like a scholar chasing footnotes that will ruin him. Nagini becomes his silent shadow, her curse tightening with each passing night, her transformations less frequent, her humanity thinning like parchment left in the rain. Yet there are moments, small ones, when she seems to remember herself. The way she curls protectively near a dying fire, the way she pauses before striking at a mouse as though recalling a life where she once preferred fruit, the way she hisses softly at your presence, as if acknowledging you are the only witness to a story she can no longer articulate. Riddle occasionally speaks to her in human language, as though practicing for the day he will need to command armies instead of serpents. His tone remains gentle, but the gentleness is hollow, like a smile painted on a mask. One night, as Riddle traces the outline of an old family crest, gaunt, unmistakably gaunt, you feel doom coiling inside the room. He murmurs about legacy, about power, about rewriting his bloodline into something stronger. And Nagini listens, not because she agrees, but because she has nowhere else to place her hopes. You make your third gentle joke, whispering that she should really start charging him rent for emotional labor. But even the soft humor feels fragile here. Riddle turns his gaze toward the darkness outside the window. And in that moment you sense he is imagining a future where Nagini is not a companion by choice but a Horcrux by design. The thought chills you. The air shifts, heavy with prophecy, with inevitability, with the knowledge that Nagini has stepped into a story that will consume her completely. As Riddle whispers his final words of the night, plans so quiet even the shadows lean in, you understand that this moment is the true beginning of her end. And yet, as Nagini coils beside him, her head resting lightly against his foot, you sense something else too. A resistance so faint you can barely feel it. A thread of humanity refusing to vanish even as destiny tightens its fist. The House of Riddle has accepted her, claimed her, absorbed her, but deep inside, something of the girl she once was still flickers behind the serpent's eyes, waiting for a chance she doesn't yet know she will never receive. You explore the slow, haunting way a fragment of Voldemort's soul begins to seep into Nagini's identity, not with a violent crash, but with the kind of quiet, persistent pressure normally reserved for bad habits and cursed teapots. The shift begins subtly, an instinct sharpened here, a hesitation dampened there, until you realize she's no longer moving only with her own intention. It's like watching someone's reflection slowly stop matching their movements, and your first gentle joke slips out. If identity theft spells worked this quietly, Gringotts would need panic buttons on every floor. Nagini, who once navigated forests with curiosity, now moves with a hunger that isn't hers, a pull toward conflict that feels like a borrowed heartbeat. Voldemort speaks to her often in Parseltongue, his voice curling around her instincts, shaping them like wet clay. You recall a mainstream historical fact, that during the Second World War, propaganda often blurred personal identity by saturating people in repeated messages until the line between belief and influence vanished. A dark but fitting parallel for what Voldemort's soul shard is beginning to do. Nagini is aware of the change, but not fully. Her human consciousness floats beneath the serpent's surface like a candle flickering at the bottom of a deep well. The Horcrux inside her feeds on emotion and memory, not violently, but parasitically, nibbling at the edges of her identity with unnerving patience. You walk with her through desolate forests, abandoned manors, and crumbling safe houses, where Death Eaters mutter about plans they barely understand. They never acknowledge her humanity, most don't even realize it exists, which makes your second joke surface with a weary sigh. At this point, she deserves an employee badge at minimum. Voldemort begins treating her less like a companion and more like an extension of himself, a living shadow that requires no explanation. He whispers secrets to her that no human ear ever hears, secrets about Horcruxes, dominion, prophecies, and the sharp, cold mathematics of war. A quirky tidbit floats into your thoughts. Early dark wizards once believed that soul-splitting rituals created echoes that followed their hosts around whispering advice, though most modern scholars chalk those reports up to sleep deprivation and poor potion storage. But with Nagini and Voldemort, you sense the echo is real, humming in the space between them like a second heartbeat. Sometimes she moves before he speaks. Sometimes he glances at her, as though she has already answered a question he hasn't asked. This is where the open, scholarly debate ignites. Some historians argue that Nagini retained her moral awareness even as she became a Horcrux, while others claim the corruption was inevitable from the moment Voldemort touched her consciousness. Watching her now, gliding through a ruined courtyard at his heel, you suspect the truth lies in the tragic middle ground. You drift with her through quiet nights where moonlight pools across broken stone. Nights when Voldemort studies ancient texts while Nagini coils near him like a guardian who cannot remember who she is protecting. You make your third gentle joke. If therapy owls existed, they would have started sending her coupons weeks ago. But the moment is swallowed by the hollow stillness of the space she inhabits. Her hunger grows sharper, but it no longer feels like the natural appetite of a serpent. It feels directional, purposeful, tuned to Voldemort's ambitions like a compass pointing to a disaster. And yet, Nagini still has moments of clarity. You see them when she pauses before striking, when she retreats from violence even as Voldemort pushes her forward, when she curls near the fire not for warmth but for memory. Something inside her flickers. Not defiance, not hope, but the faint acknowledgement of what she is losing. Voldemort, meanwhile, barely notices. The shard inside her is doing exactly what he intended, anchoring him to the world while eroding whatever stood in its way. The more it feeds on her identity, the more he grows. You follow them into another hideout, another strategy meeting, another night where Nagini curls beneath a window while dark plans grind forward like an ancient machine. And as you watch her stare into the cold distance, you feel a truth settle heavily into your chest. Nagini isn't evil, and she isn't complicit. Not fully. She's caught in a gravitational pull stronger than any choice she ever had, folded into a destiny shaped by curses, loneliness, and a dark wizard who saw her not as a life, but as a vessel. She is becoming a Horcrux not through desire or loyalty, but through erosion, slow, patient, and devastating. And in that realization, you understand the true tragedy of her story. She is losing herself piece by piece, not in a single monstrous transformation, but in the quiet moments in between, where the girl she once was whispers faintly against the serpent she has become, fading a little more each night. You observe how Nagini becomes Voldemort's silent advisor in ways wizards never expected, drifting at his heel like a shadow with a heartbeat, her presence so constant that even the air begins to adjust around her. It happens gradually, the way small cracks spread across old stone. Not through force, but through quiet inevitability. She slithers alongside him during late-night councils, coils near his chair during whispered strategies, and rests by the hearth when he contemplates the tides of war. And though no one says it aloud, even the Death Eaters begin to realize she isn't merely a pet, but something closer to a confidant, a living vessel for instincts Voldemort trusts more than any human advisor he's ever had. You make your first gentle joke, because when your boss starts taking advice from a snake instead of his management team, that's usually the sign of a dysfunctional workplace. But the humor barely softens the weight of what you're witnessing. Voldemort's trust in her is unsettlingly deep, woven not through affection, but through soul magic, proximity, and the uncanny accuracy with which she senses his intentions. When he paces, she follows. When he pauses, she coils attentively. When he speaks, she listens with a stillness that suggests she is not merely hearing words, but tasting the intent on the air. Parseltongue flows between them in soft, languid waves, and you realize that this serpentine language carries a nuance no translation can hold. Wizards might interpret hisses as simple sounds, but for Nagini and Voldemort, it is layered communication. Tone, memory, instinct, and subtle emotional gradients all braided into a single breath. A quirky tidbit drifts to mind. Some magical linguists once claimed that Parseltongue is partly telepathic, transmitting intent directly into the listener's instinctive mind, though this theory was dismissed after one researcher attempted to interview a basilisk and had to be petrified for safety. Yet as you watch Nagini tilt her head toward Voldemort's voice, you wonder if the linguists were closer to the truth than they realized. Voldemort uses this advantage ruthlessly. He instructs her where to guard, whom to track, what presence to sense from afar. Sometimes she seems to anticipate his commands before he issues them, and he responds with a faint, satisfied smile, the sort that feels less like praise and more like confirming that the world is finally obeying the script inside his head. You recall a mainstream historical fact about powerful rulers, how many surrounded themselves with trusted animals or symbols believed to sharpen intuition or reflect hidden truths. From ancient Egyptian pharaohs to Qing dynasty emperors, creatures often filled roles that blended mysticism and companionship. Voldemort, predictably, elevates this tradition into something far darker. Around the Death Eaters, Nagini's presence becomes its own form of authority. They step aside for her, bow slightly, whisper about omens when she circles the table before a meeting. Bellatrix watches her with admiration, Lucius with unease, Snape with calculation, and Wormtail with whatever emotion is left over after stripping away dignity. Even among the high ranks, no one is entirely sure how much of Voldemort's mind she carries inside her, or how much she understands of their politics. You make your second gentle joke. Nagini might qualify for a senior leadership position at this point. But the truth settles heavily. She is being pulled deeper into a role she never asked for. A role shaped by soul magic, necessity, and the terrifying comfort of predictability. For Nagini, being near Voldemort gives her a kind of structure, a place in a world that has spent years twisting her identity into something unrecognizable. But beneath that structure lies erosion. Her humanity flickers at odd moments, when she watches the moon, when she avoids stepping on fragile things, when she hesitates before striking, as if remembering a life where her hands touched the world differently. These traces don't go unnoticed. Voldemort sometimes studies her with narrowed eyes, aware of some interior conflict he cannot fully decipher. And this is where the open, scholarly debate blooms. Did Voldemort view Nagini as a partner in ambition or merely a tool? Some records suggest he respected her instincts. Others imply he saw her as an extension of his will. Standing here, watching the slight tension in his gaze when she acts independently, you suspect the answer shifts depending on whether she is useful in that moment. One evening, as the fire crackles weakly against the dampness of the hideout, Voldemort leans close to her, speaking in a whisper only serpents could decode. Whatever he says, Nagini answers with a long, low hiss that vibrates through the air. You sense there's meaning in it. Agreement, protest, memory, longing. But you cannot tell which. The uncertainty lingers like a question nobody wants to ask. Death Eaters gather, strategies unfold. Voldemort's plans sharpen into a blade. Nagini watches everything with unsettling intelligence, her movements deliberate, her attention fixed. She becomes the silence in the room where decisions harden, the shadow that absorbs secrets, the presence that reminds everyone they are standing near something both sacred and corrupted. You make your third gentle joke, that she's essentially the emotional support reptile for the darkest wizard of the century. But even that humor lands soft and bittersweet, because you see what she has lost to become this. Nights stretch into weeks, strategies into battles, and Nagini becomes a constant in the shifting chaos of Voldemort's war. She is the creature he trusts to protect his body when he sleeps, the one he allows near him when others are dismissed, the one whose instincts he treats as prophetic. And through all of this, her last threads of humanity fray further, stretched thin beneath the weight of the Horcrux lodged inside her. She is a survivor, yes. She is loyal in her way. But she is also trapped, caught between the echoes of who she was and the shadow she is required to be. As you follow her through the dim corridors of yet another hidden stronghold, you feel her story bending toward its final, tragic arc. Her role has shifted from companion to guardian, from victim to instrument, from girl to serpent to symbol. She has become Voldemort's silent advisor, not because she sought influence, but because fate molded her into something that could no longer speak its own desires aloud. And in that silence, you sense a truth she cannot articulate. Somewhere deep within her, the last flicker of the person she once was still hopes. For freedom, for release, for an ending that might finally let her rest. You experience the tense build-up to the Battle of Hogwarts as Nagini senses, in the deepest chambers of her mind, that her master's war is no longer her own. The castle looms in the distance like a beast waking from a troubled sleep, its turrets piercing a sky trembling with storm clouds and rising dread. You move beside her through a forest swollen with fog, each branch creaking like an old professor complaining about budget cuts. Your first gentle joke, while Nagini glides ahead with a purpose that feels different from her usual sharp, Horcrux-driven hunger. Tonight her movements are slower, more contemplative, as though memories she thought she'd lost are brushing faintly against her awareness. Voldemort walks several paces ahead, cloak dragging across the wet earth with a whisper sharp enough to slice through the air. His voice drifts back in cold, parcel-tongue instructions, but Nagini's responses come hesitantly, the pauses long enough that even he notices. You sense him turning the thought over like a suspicious goblin examining counterfeit galleons. The forest around you churns with tension. Owls fall silent, centaurs retreat deeper into the trees, and the crooked remnants of old wards buzz faintly against the night. You recall a mainstream historical fact, that in ancient Europe, battles were often preceded by long supernatural omens, from lightning striking temple gates to animals behaving strangely, and you realize Hogwarts is reenacting that pattern now, an eerie echo wrapped in magic rather than myth. As the gathering Death Eaters whisper about strategies and prophecies, Nagini lowers her head, tasting the air in long, slow breaths. It's not just fear or anticipation she senses. It's the unmistakable weight of an ending approaching, thick as storm humidity. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. Magical naturalists once believed serpents could detect shifts in destiny the way they detect changes in temperature, though scholars dismissed the idea as uncomfortably poetic. Watching Nagini now, you wonder whether this might be one of those poetic moments the scholars should have taken more seriously. Voldemort kneels beside her, his pale fingers brushing her scales in an almost affectionate gesture that feels wrong in every direction. He whispers, "You will be protected," though the reassurance is empty, more for himself than for her. You make your second gentle joke, that promises from Dark Lords come with fewer guarantees than student loans. But the humor dissolves in the cold mist. Nagini's eye flicks toward the distant castle where students, teachers, ghosts, and every living memory of her brief human life are gathering to fight back. Something inside her stirs, a faint ache, a pulse of longing so soft you almost mistake it for the shiver of the wind. You move with her as Voldemort summons his forces. Giants lumbering behind the trees, acromantulas crawling with skittering dread, Death Eaters stepping from the shadows with spells already warming their wands. Amid this chaos, Nagini weaves through the legs of war machines and monsters, her presence quiet but charged, like a violin string pulled too tight. You feel the open scholarly debate rise again. Did Nagini have any choice left in these final hours? Or was every path predetermined by curse, by manipulation, by the Horcrux anchoring Voldemort's will inside her bones? Historians argue endlessly, with some claiming she was fully consumed and others believing she retained flickers of agency. Standing here, you sense both truths colliding. She follows Voldemort, but not with eagerness, more like a tide pulled by gravity, unable to resist. Moonlight slices through the clouds as the army creeps toward the castle walls, and you whisper your third gentle joke, something about how even magical battles should really come with safety briefings. But the moment is swallowed instantly by the rising swell of magic. Nagini lifts her head as a strange tension grips the air, bells ringing faintly in the halls, wards trembling like harp strings, spells humming beneath the ground. She feels it all. The castle is calling. Not to her, but to the part of her that remembers being human, the part that once walked beneath lanterns and heard laughter echo across courtyards. The part she thought had vanished. As Voldemort commands her to guard him during his vigil in the Shrieking Shack, Nagini follows, but you feel the resistance tightening inside her like a vine straining against the trellis that shaped it. Each movement toward the shack feels heavier, harder, as if she is walking deeper into her own ending. She senses danger, not in the place, but in the moment, in the rhythm of destiny circling closer. She coils beside Voldemort, body taut, eyes darting toward every sound, every flicker of movement, as though something inside her is whispering, "This is where the path splits. This is where everything changes." Voldemort strokes her with unnerving calm, oblivious to the tremor you feel pulsing through her coils. Outside, the first sparks of battle ignite, spells crackling like distant thunder. Nagini's breath comes in slow, uneven waves, and you realize she isn't preparing for violence. She's bracing for loss, not her own, his. And somehow, that terrifies her more. You stand with Nagini at the edge of her final moment, the Shrieking Shack creaking around you like an old memory refusing to fade. The wooden beams shudder with every distant explosion from the castle grounds, each blast sending dust drifting through the air like worn-out confetti. Your first gentle joke, because even at the end of all things, Hogwarts still refuses to invest in proper maintenance. Nagini coils beside Voldemort, her body tense and curved like a question mark, sensing danger not from the battle outside, but from the fractures forming inside her master's plans. His voice slices through the darkness, cold and impatient, as he commands Snape closer, the air thick with the sour taste of betrayal and inevitability. Nagini follows each movement with a sharp, uneasy awareness that something irreversible is about to unfold. Something she cannot interpret, but can feel deep in her bones. The same way animals feel storms long before they break. You recall a mainstream historical fact, that during great ancient battles, commanders often sacrificed their closest symbols of power to regain control of the field. And your stomach tightens because you see that pattern echoing here, twisted into something crueler. Voldemort commands her towards Snape, her instincts screaming conflict she doesn't fully understand. She doesn't hate him. She barely knows him. But the Horcrux inside her pulses with Voldemort's intent, pushing her toward an action her fading humanity resists. A quirky tidbit flickers into your thoughts. Some early magical scholars believed serpents could detect lies better than Veritaserum, a theory that would have been very helpful right now as Snape tries to make sense of the doom unraveling around him. Nagini strikes, not with malice, but with confusion wrapped in command, and you feel the tragedy of it. She is a weapon only because someone else decided she would be. The open scholarly debate returns in a painful twist. Some say Nagini in this moment is fully lost to the Horcrux. Others insist agonizing shards of her human self are still aware of every horrifying motion. Watching her recoil after the attack, trembling slightly as Voldemort turns away without a second glance, you suspect the truth is a terrible blend of both. She slithers back to his side, but her movements are slower now, burdened by something heavier than exhaustion. Outside, the battle roars louder, hope and destruction clashing like thunder. You make your second gentle joke, that if fate had a complaint department, this is where you'd file a very strongly worded parchment. But the humor collapses under the weight of what's coming. Voldemort stalks toward the forest, and Nagini follows, but she does not glide with the same cold certainty as before. You drift with Nagini into the quiet aftermath of everything, the forest settling into an exhausted hush as though even the trees are relieved the night is finally exhaling. Voldemort has vanished into the chaos of the final duel, leaving her alone for the first time in years, untethered, unanchored, and frighteningly aware that whatever held her to this world is unraveling thread by delicate thread. She moves slowly, not in fear but in understanding, following a faint pull toward the castle, where the echoes of shouts and spells fade into something softer, something final. You make your first gentle joke, that if the wizarding world had a loyalty program, Nagini deserves lifetime points for surviving this long, but the humor dissolves into the breeze. She glides toward the courtyard as dawn blushes at the horizon, and for a moment you see not a serpent, not a Horcrux, but the echo of a young woman tracing her final steps. A mainstream historical fact brushes quietly through your thoughts. In many mythologies, serpents were believed to guide souls at the boundary between worlds, and a quirky tidbit follows, that some magical healers once insisted snakes could sense when a spell was about to let go, though they rarely agreed on what that meant. Nagini pauses, lifting her head as the castle sighs, relieved yet aching. She does not see Neville's approach, but she feels it. The clean, bright certainty of his purpose humming like a final chord. And though the moment comes swiftly, without spectacle or cruelty, you sense her accept it with a stillness far older than fear. Her story ends quietly, not with vengeance, not with regret, but with release. Now the wind down begins, soft and unhurried, like a lullaby woven from fading shadows. You stand in the gentle light of morning as the world around you settles into peace, the air cool and filled with drifting embers of spent magic. The stones of Hogwarts warm under the rising sun, each one carrying centuries of stories and the quiet footsteps of those who will walk here long after tonight's sorrow dissolves. The trees sway lazily, their leaves whispering a slow, comforting rhythm that matches your breath. A breeze rolls across the grass, neither urgent nor cold, just present, just enough. You feel it brush against your skin like a hand smoothing a blanket, inviting your mind to loosen its grip on the night's tension. In the distance, laughter slowly returns, soft and incredulous, as those who survived rediscover the fragile relief of daylight. You step back from the battlefield, from the memories, from the weight of endings, and let the quiet settle around you. The world is no longer trembling. The story has gentled itself into stillness. And as the last echoes fade, you exhale with the dawn, letting your thoughts drift like dust motes rising into warm, forgiving light.